Okay, welcome everyone to TAM Lab number 57. Today is April 16th, 2020, and we have Sean Lambert joining us today. He's going to be presenting part two of a session that he did about 2 weeks ago around VMC on AWS and how you spin up a brand new SDDC start to finish. So today he's going to be talking about migrations from SDDC to SDDC or C2C or cloud-to-cloud migrations, and that's leveraging HCX. So I will stop my sharing, and I'm going to hand it over to Sean. Sean, if you want to introduce yourself and take it away.
Yeah, sure thing. So Sean Lambert, like Steve said, staff TAM. I'm based out of Richmond, Virginia. I've spent a lot of time over the last, 2 years on VMware Cloud on AWS, and obviously with VMware Cloud on AWS comes HCX. And so what I wanted to build on is something that, Steve alluded to again 2 weeks ago. We did a kind of A to Z deployment of an SDDC all the way back from, setting it up inside of AWS with your availability zones and your subnets, and then rolling out an SDDC. And so what I thought we would do is we build upon that. And so I basically tore down the demo that we did 2 weeks ago, and I spun up 2 more one-node SDDCs. And so you can see down here on the lower left, I've got the TAM Lab HCX Demo 1 that's located in Northern Virginia, and then I've got the HCX Demo 2 that is in Oregon. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up a site pair between these 2 SDDCs, and then after we set up the site pair, we're then going to set up a site interconnect. Once that interconnect is set up, I'm going to show you how all the appliances, how all of the appliances are deployed. And then once those appliances are deployed, if we have time, I'm even going to introduce a network extension in which we're going to extend the network from Demo 1 to Demo 2. We're going to do a vMotion of a VM across the wire from Virginia to Oregon. We're going to keep the VM up. We're going to use another VM to ping that VM that is moving real time, and we're going to see some latency changes, but we'll see that the VM stays up the entire time is the intent of the demo. So I feel like I'm tempting all of the demo gods all at once to see if this is all going to go how I'd hoped. I've done this 3 times over the last 2 days, so let's hope that this works. So the first thing that I wanted to run through here is actually the deploy of HCX and how you go about that. As you can see when you log into the Cloud Services portal, we've got VMC on AWS here, but then we actually need to go in and deploy an HCX appliance. So how we go about doing that is if you go into any SDDC, irrespective of which one, you go to details, you go to add-ons, and then there are these 2 add-ons that are built into the service right now, and that's Site Recovery and HCX. And so once you want to deploy HCX, you click on Open HCX. And then what will come up will be essentially all these SDDCs that are tied to your org. As you can see, we have HCX deployed in all of these different SDDCs. And if I had to deploy it brand new, I would click on Deploy HCX. So because it's already deployed, the actual deployment of HCX takes anywhere between, 1 minute. It takes anywhere probably between 20 to 30 minutes just for the sake of time. I didn't want to have everybody watch that because, again, it's like watching paint dry. So I recorded it earlier of what this deploy looks like. So, we'll go through it really quick. It's just about a minute. So you go to add-ons again, you click on Open HCX. As soon as it comes up here, you'll deploy it, you confirm it, and then the deployment will start initiating. So you can see here that you've got it's prepping for VMC for HCX Cloud. And then this will spin for a little bit. And just for the sake of demo, I went into the actual vCenter so you can see it being deployed here. So you can see that we're now uploading this HCX manager that is going to be deployed. And so you can see these OVF packages are being parsed and fetched. And then all the scripts that we have built into the backend, it simply just deploys the HCX Cloud Manager into the management resource pool. You'll notice that it doesn't sit in the compute resource pool. And so it'll start transferring these files over, and then it will build out essentially this appliance here. But you can see all the processes that it needs to go through to do that. Again, you can see that the actual file is landing on the vSAN data store because that's where management workloads go. It doesn't go on the workload data store because that's where we control all of our production workloads, if you will. You can see here that the plugins start deploying so that we can manage HCX via vCenter. So I've got a notification up top. Those errors down below are there because I deployed this previously And so I wanted to show that there are alarms that also get baked into this from a vCenter and alerting standpoint. But now you can see that the HCX manager is up, it's powered on. Now the power on is automatic because once again, a workload cluster that we have, we don't control the power. And so you can see now that it's configuring it. And then you know that it's done because you see the HCX icon in the upper right, and then you go into open HCX, and then we can start administering it. And so that's how the deploy works. But if we go back into, how we need to start connecting these things together, one of the important things to point out is just like deploying an SDDC, by default, all of the rules of access, everything is disabled. You can't get to a vCenter, you can't get to your HCX appliance. And so to be able to actually start managing HCX the same way that you would manage your vCenter is you've got to come into the management gateway and you've got to set up some firewall rules. So for web access primarily, you need to set up an HCX inbound rule, just like we did with vCenter, in which you're going any to HCX. So if the same premises apply, the additional service that you could add here would be an SSH, but for obvious reasons, I just elected not to put that service in there, but you could. And so once your HCX inbound rule is set on your management gateway, you can then see, right, the interface of HCX. Now, for the addition of doing a cloud-to-cloud deployment, you also need to go into your gateway firewall for the management side, and you also need to set up an outbound connection that goes from HCX out to the internet. And so on HCX Demo 1, I have it set. On HCX Demo 2, you will also see that I have it set as well on the gateway firewall here on the management side, is that I've got HCX inbound and I've got HCX outbound for both SDDCs sitting here. So what I'll do next is we'll go ahead and go through this deployment and this site pair, okay? So there's two different ways that you can do this. I'm going to use the HCX splash here, but I'm also going to be bouncing back and forth between the HCX plugin here, because essentially this dashboard is being ported over, right? So I could create a site pair through the plugin, or I could create a site pair through the actual console. Why would you want to do, you could do it either way, but just for the sake of the demo, I wanted to show more of the HCX console than the plugin, because obviously with the console, it's much more powerful. And so my source is going to be Northern Virginia. My target is going to be Oregon. And so to connect the remote site, it really is as simple as putting in your HCX information here. So what I want to do, excuse me, as I get into HCX on the Demo 2 side, I'm going to come into this vCenter, or this SDDC, sorry, here. And then the easiest way to get these URLs, if you don't want to click around everywhere, is if you go into settings, you see now that HCX is deployed, I now have HCX information here, not just vCenter information. So from a support standpoint, it also helps if, if support is asking, what's your resolution IP for both internal and external, and your public and privates, you have them all here. And so this is really good information just to have offhand if you need it. And this is the easiest place to pull it, is from this settings tab. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this URL here. And then I'm going to use cloud admin again at vmc.local, as that local cloud admin rights allows me to do as much as I can here. And then I'm going to pull some vCenter credentials here, copy them over, I'm going to drop it in, I'm going to connect. Is there a typo here that I missed? Let's see here.
Yeah, you missed the D in cloud admin there.
Let me see. There you go. See if it works this time. It was either that or I copied the password of the wrong vCenter. And that's one thing that, as you do these things out, all the splashes start to look the same. Okay, so now you can see here, we've got our site pair up, authentication work. We're going from Demo 1 to Demo 2. The next step that we want to do is we now want to set up a service mesh. Okay, so the service mesh is essentially these services that get deployed to allow you to migrate machines. And so, or workloads. And so this service mesh, when you deploy it, we're going to deploy three things here. We're going to deploy a network extension. We're going to deploy an interconnect, and then or a cross connect rather, and then we're going to also deploy a WAN optimization appliance, and it's all going to be deployed just by creating the mesh. So in order to create the mesh, it walks you through it's very clean on the deployment, right? So you can see our sites that we have selected. For the sake of the demo, it's really easy because from a SDDC to SDDC, we already have the compute profiles that are already built in. And the reason why I didn't show a diagram earlier of what this looks like, from a slide presentation standpoint, is that as we're building this mesh out, HCX is going to visually show us where everything is sitting, right? So you have the SDDC data center here, and we have these management resource pools of where these compute profiles are going to sit. The difference here that you'll also notice is because this is a cloud to cloud, we don't have HCX Enterprise deployed because we're not in a hybrid cloud model in which we have something on-prem in which we're leveraging HCX Enterprise as a product or a solution. So because of that, our replicated assisted vMotion is not available. Our OS assisted migration and our SRM integrations are not there because we're not using any of those components. We're using HCX managers that are pre-deployed via the VMware Cloud on AWS service natively. Because of that, we're not leveraging those enterprise features.
Hey, Sean.
Yep.
If you had HCX Enterprise on-prem, would you have those options on the cloud instance?
Yes, because it would recognize your site pair and it would recognize you're running HCX Enterprise on the other side.
Cool.
And that is I think, was it a month ago, David Glading, I believe, also did a TAM Lab on hybrid. And so that's where I would check first. And then if we want to go deeper, we may be able to do that separately to how we can do OS assisted migrations and things of that nature. That's a good question. So one of the things I want to point out here that I learned quickly is that, off the top of your head, if you were just doing this natively, you might think that you want to deploy this with using your management application network because you can see I have 16 available IPs. I would have more if I changed my subnet, but I used a 192.168/24 subnet for this demo. You want to deploy your uplink profiles, obviously, to your external network. If you don't, during the deployment, it'll break. And if we have time, I may go back and just show you what happens when it breaks and how you can redeploy, but let's make sure that it works how it's intended first. And so now you can see, now that I've made these changes here, you can see where these HCX managers can be deployed here. And then you can see where all of these appliances are going to sit. And then it routes it out through this external network into the data center network, into the cloud and across, right? And so again, make sure that you choose your external network as your uplinks on both sides. This network extension appliance scale, this really depends on how many distributed virtual switches pairs you want deployed. It completely depends on how your architecture is going to set up and whether or not you're going to stretch across. Just for the sake of the demo, again, I don't want to make it too complicated just because it takes longer to deploy. So I'm just going to deploy one appliance. But if you needed to deploy more than one to handle the workload of these cloud-to-cloud migrations, you could. And then if you want to know the maximums, if you go to the configuration maximums for HCX, they're all there. So I'm just going to deploy one network extension appliance. Again, because we're not using HCX Enterprise, we don't have the application and TCP flow conditioning that would normally come. Again, that's an additional feature set that comes with Enterprise. We can set our limit for our optimization. I'm leaving it at 10,000 just by default, but that is something that can also be changed. And then last but not least, you review the topology, make sure that you're set. And then afterwards you continue, just for the sake, you want to name these interconnects because if you deploy more than one, obviously you want to be able to have differentiation in between the two. So I'm just going to name this TAM Lab Demo HCX, or HCX Demo rather. And then we're going to deploy. So you can see here, use the topology, the appliances will pop, but now we can see here that this service mesh is going to deploy here. And so what I'll do in a moment, as soon as it starts digging in, I'm going to bounce back and forth between the tasks that you see here, and then I'm going to show what's going on as vCenter ramps it up. Got any questions out there as this is starting to spin?
Yeah, nothing in the chat. Anybody on the line, feel free to unmute yourself if you've got questions. So far,
okay.
pretty straightforward.
So let me go back to hosts and clusters here. We should start seeing some action here in a minute. And in order to deploy the service mesh, it's not too bad as far as the time. One of the things that I will call out is as HCX is releasing right now, we're on pretty much a 2-week cadence for that release. Every 2 weeks, HCX is coming out with a new version. Version 139 just came out late last night, or yesterday morning is actually when it came out. And so we're on 139. And so in another 2 weeks, 140 should be out. And then the cadence is going to be between like every 2 weeks to every month is when it's going to deploy. All right, so now that it started to grab these, we can see that it's validated the service mesh on the other side on 2. And so now that that's being validated there, it's now starting to prepare these fleets is what they're called. And so these fleets are essentially these VMs that are going to start being deployed behind the scenes. But again, the HCX service mesh and this interconnect dashboard here allows us to see how the deployment is going. You know, like everybody else that's on this side of the fence, it's really nice there's something about seeing things go that allow you to feel a little bit better about what you've decided to just do. So now you can see here that the resources, we're checking that we actually have capacity inside of these SDDCs to deploy them. Now that we're doing that, we're allocating all of these resources. So you can see that we've got our WAN cross connect here, we've got our WAN optimization appliance here, and then we have our network extension appliances here that are starting to be deployed. Now you can see here that this network extension is starting to come up, the cross connects are coming up, the WAN optimization is coming out here. And so if I go over to the other SDDC, see too many tabs. All right, so this is the other side. So you can see that these remote deployments have already gone. Now, keep in mind that you needed to deploy HCX Manager on both SDDCs and then pair them together, right? But the initiation of these deployments of these 3 appliances came from the deployment on the source side. And then you can see here, these are all starting to bake out here.
Hey, Sean, I think it's worth noting the names of all those appliances reflect the name that you named.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, exactly. So exactly. And that's the reason why you want to come up with names that make sense to the team, because you don't want to just put vApp, right? And then the next thing you know, your service mesh went down because they're gone. So your naming is very, very important when it comes to deploying these appliances here. Now, if we want to drive around here a little bit, we can go back to the compute profiles here. You can see now when we come back to this splash, it's still showing us what's going on with the deployment, but then now we can see the status of all of these services between the interconnect service, the optimization service, the cross-cloud vMotion migration. Another thing that I want to call out that we'll see here in a minute is once the deployment is done, we're going to see what looks like another host land on these vCenters. And so it's going to look like we just added a resource, or it looks like we have a 2-host vCenter, but here it comes right here, right? So this 192.168.1.21.216, if you see here, it's a VMware mobility platform. With 128 logical processors and 8 NICs, right? I mean, it looks huge. What it actually is this is offloading the vMotion of the migration for workloads, and it's moving it off of the normal vMotion construct inside of a traditional vCenter. That's why this is there. It is not necessarily it's not a physical host. Obviously, there's nothing you can do with it. This is sitting here primarily for vMotions using HCX. So when we do the migration, you'll see that the workload will actually land on this host here for a minute. And I say host in air quotes, and then you'll see it actually move into the compute resource pool as it's deployed. So the service mesh has been created. We see that all statuses right now are red because it's still validating a lot of the builds here, but these should all be coming up green here soon. Deployment's done, but all the talking still has to happen. So you can see that this is showing is down, this one is up. And this happened last time. So one thing that you can do to force it, let's see if this works, is you can do a resync. So as you resync, it's just going to kind of kick the service mesh to see, if it's going to actually react to how it should this time. The fact that everything is green here, if the tunnels are down or you're having an issue, you will see a red exclamation point or a yellow triangle across those services not working. And so you can see that the WAN optimization service now went to green. And so hopefully, if all goes well, we'll then see the interconnect services start coming up green here. And then as soon as it comes up green, then what I'll do is we'll add a network extension to that as well. So just for the sake of time, as it's plowing through here, let me show you an additional construct that we're doing for the demo here. So I'm back on the SDDC console here, and we're going to go to segments, because what I wanted to do is show how the best way to go around segments if you're going to want to move VMs but not re-IP them. So let's go back into details here. Go to networking and security. We go into segments, and so if you remember on the last call, or not the last call, but the last session we did, we talked about making sure that you understand your IPs, right? Don't make, if you're having two SDDCs, control your segments and make sure that you understand what's assigned where. Well, not necessarily going against that rule, but understanding that I'm going to extend my network. On HCX demo 1 and 2, I have a segment name that is HCX apps with the same gateway and IP prefix. Because what I want to see, let me go back to 1 just so that I can show you guys that they do in fact match. So you can see here that 5.1, 5.1, and so I've got the segment on both SDDCs because my intention is to stretch the segment between the two, and that's why they're redundant.
Sean, do they need to be matched, or only when you stretch? You did that for a reason, right?
Yeah, I did that for the stretch, and so you can see here now all the service meshes are up. We're green here, which is a good thing. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the network, and the rollback failed because I was killing processes at the time. So I'm going to unextend this. Actually, no, let's just see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then I'll blow it away. So what I did, and just for the sake of everybody seeing it, how you do it, even though it's already there, we only have one edge, right? So we're using the compute gateway as the edge. And because I have the HCX stretched already, it's not going to pop. But if I use this default compute network gateway as an extension, I would put in the gateway on my side right now that I want to use to extend that network. And because on both sides it's 5.1, that's what I'm putting for my extension. And then as soon as you extend that network, then it's going to broker it. And now I can talk to the other SDDC that I have this network extension into. And so we're going to do a couple things here now, just so that you can see how it works. So in the past, just to show it, yesterday I was moving some appliances around and doing a little bit of testing. So how this works as far as your migration, there's a couple different ways that we can do it, right? And I know that some of this David Glading covered in his demo, but you can either do a bulk migration, right, with this setup, or you can do a vMotion. If I do a bulk migration and I want to retain the MAC, let's say I could do these two for bulk. And as I'm doing that, all these containers need to be selected. So I need to make sure that I can put it in the actual resource pool with the correct folder, the correct data store. For me, you can change how you want your VMs provisioned, but because these are all thin, just keep this format the same. Here's where I could schedule it, right? If we didn't want to do it live, then I could have my maintenance window start today at 2:30, and then I could have it be over in an hour. if I wanted to, as far as, so that's how you would schedule those actual vMotions. And then the last piece that it wants is where it's going to go, but because there's really only other one to choose on the other end, it's automatically defaulting to HCX apps. And so these are where these both are going to land. If I go to validate, so the reason why this one is not going to go is because VM tools is out of date on these two appliances here, right? So HCX could try to do a graceful shutdown because I'm doing bulk, right? But if I do vMotion on these, it shouldn't get that error anymore if I validate it, right? So validate, we're fine because VM tools doesn't come into play when you're doing a vMotion because it's not going down. So if I go to go, it's going to start these migrations. And then if we want to go back to the dashboard, this is where we can see the status. We've got 2 in process. And because that network extension is showing 0 here, let me go ahead and tear that down, and then we'll see if we can add a new one back. We'll see if this works or not. This is where we're going to test to see what the demo gods say. Let me go back to migrations here. So it's still pulling them there. And we should see some activity on, that's our side here. So these 2 are still being staged to move.
So Sean, if that network extension is not in place, it's not going to prevent the migration from happening. It's just going to mean that they're not on the network when they get to the other side, right?
That is correct. They won't be. You're moving the VM, but it's not necessarily. It's not going to talk back. So if you wanted to, your assumption you were moving that over and it's just going to stay on the wire like it would a vMotion within a cluster, that is not going to happen. It'll be dead on the other side. You know, one option that you could do for a migration here is if we select Photon 3, another powerful option is here. If you know that you want to move this over to a subnet that isn't going to be stretched, this is where you can re-IP it once you move it. Or before you move it, you re-IP it. Then when it's moved, it lands, it gets re-IP'd, and then off you go. You don't have to do anything else. So depending on what your use case is, I know people that have done re-IPing after they move it. I've known some that re-IP it during the move, and I've known some that frankly have tried to do it before the move. I would suggest doing it during this type of action or doing it afterwards. But you know, it really is up to the use case and obviously how sensitive the application is to those types of changes. Yeah, now we can see that they're moving now. Let's go back and see if this network extension has been ripped out yet. All right, cool. So the extended network is gone. So I will add the HCX extension back with that gateway. So now we can see that extension started. You can see here, as I make that change, we should see a change here in the tasks that show that there's some type of configuration with the NE appliance that's sitting here. So you can see here, as we're moving it over, see how this Photon VM1 is sitting here now? It's because it's taking care of them. It's moving over into this SDDC, and because of that, because the migration is still going on, this is where the vMotion part is taking place as far as, you know, moving it. But then once the end part of that VM with the, you know, I think it's the VCX file that comes over last, as soon as those get brought back together, then this VM will move into the compute resource pool. But for right now, this VM's hanging out on this mobility platform. Okay, so this extension's been complete. And then you can see here, let's 220, no, this one didn't happen, it hasn't changed it yet, which is fine. Okay, so the network extension is done. If we go back to the vMotion, I know that I'm driving all over the place, so if I'm making people cross-eyed, I apologize. Okay, so VM2 should be done, which it is. No, it's still sitting there, sorry. VM1's been moved over. So we can see that the switchover is starting, and then if you wanted to see more status, you can see what the migration group and the ID was there for troubleshooting if you needed to. Another thing that I want to call out, once this is over, I'll move them back and then we'll move it again, but there's some disaster recovery type functionality that you can put in here, right? So let's, just for the sake of COVID, right, I have this FAH VM1 that's doing some, some protein analysis here. If I wanted to protect this VM here because of the plugin, I'm looking at this in a DR scenario, I could protect this to a target site. If I want to compress it or quiesce it, I could. But what I want to do is I want to protect this. And so this is an additional feature that I don't really think we talk enough about within HCX, is being able to use it for DR. SRM definitely obviously still has its place, but there may be use cases in which you want to use HCX to protect a machine. The processes are very similar, in which you still have to select your compute resource pool. How many snapshots do you want to take? We're just going to do, I don't know, 12 hours and cut it in the middle. The most snapshots we want to have is 2. So this is where you're setting your, your RPO, and we'll have the RPO be 15 minutes. Destination folder, we want to drop it in the workloads, and we want to protect this. So now that I have all this stuff set up, I'm not going to enable compression or quiesce for just the sake of time, but this is where it's going to sit. So as soon as I finish this, we go up back into the dashboard here, it's going to run through and it's going to start protecting this VM here. So you can see network extension is now up. We have 1 migration in process, and 1 should be over here. And so what I'll do here, I know what I'm bouncing all over the place, but I just want to show all the different options that we've got here. So if I go to DR, it's starting to chew through FAH1. And so for the sake of time, I know it's going faster than I thought it was going to be as far as time here. So if I come back into my vCenter and I get on Photon VM3 and I log in, all right, and I want to ping, let's say I'm going to ping Photon VM1. That's a 5.30. Okay, so if I ping 192.68.1.30, see if it works. There's a couple of these that I spun up. There we go. No, hang on. Let me try a different one here. Come on, 5. You guys are quiet today. Is it that simple, or am I doing that bad?
I know, everyone's quiet. I do have a question on the DR, but we'll wait to come back to that.
All right, so let's see. So I want to ping, all right, hang on. Yeah, so that got moved off, so I still want to ping VM3, which is 35. So if I ping 2.168.5. What did I say it was? 35? Yeah, 35. The photon bug, not the photon bug, but the photon thing may have gotten me here. Let me check something here. All righty. Let's see if I go the other way. more than one way to do this. So let's go back to demo 1 or demo 2, sorry. So what I'm trying to do here, everybody, is I want to show the latency between moving it on and off, because as we move applications over the wire, it becomes extremely important that we understand our latency requirements for applications, because the latency, it's not like really, really slow, but at the same time, it's still, you know, important that you understand what your latency requirements are for applications. So we're going to ping 525 here. Let's see if I do this right this time. And just so you guys know, if you want to know how to enable ping on Photon, which obviously I think I may have skipped a couple of VMs, that's the Daniel Pulisic wrote a great blog, but VMware Photon OS by default is ICMP is disabled. See, I'm on 1 and I want to ping to 25. All right, so that's pinging, right? We see that we got, you know, sub millisecond. So if I go back into HCX, and it's still building on this protection site. So let's go back and let's do another migration, because we've migrated one way and it's complete. Now we want to migrate the other way, or a reverse migration. So if I go here into migrate and I select reverse migration, HCX already knows the VMs that I've moved over to another SDDC. So it sees all of these, right? And right now, because Photon VM1 is pinging 2, I'm going to take 2, okay? And then I'm going to do the same thing, but in reverse. So now I'm going to move it back. And as I move it back, we should, number 1, we shouldn't see any drops from a ping standpoint. And 2, we should see the latency increase, because now we're going over the internet, you know, the connections that HCX is set up to be able to do that. So it's validated. Validation is good. So now we're going to reverse back. And then we're going to watch these pings go as we move it over. But Steve, as that's happening, you wanted to go back into the DR piece here.
Yeah, just curious, and it's totally fine if you don't know the answer, but like, what are the requirements from a availability perspective as far as disaster recovery? So like, if HCX is not available, will these VMs fail over in the event they need to, or is it like a manual failover? Just curious, so like, how that works.
As far if HCX isn't available, so my understanding, everything is going to stay in the state that they are. So yeah, I mean, HCX is still it's got to be there, yeah. The way that it is. If it goes down, yeah, we're going to be running into problems. So does that answer the question? It's got to be up. Yeah. It won't know what to do if it's not there.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking like dependencies, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. No, HCX would definitely be a dependency, as well as, you know, the WAN optimization, the interconnect, as well as the network extension. Network extension, not really, right? But the optimization and the interconnect needs to be. So one of the things that you'll see here, not moving yet, is that you see that I've set it up for protection, but I haven't tested it yet, right? So the additional actions that should come up here is that I need to be able to test. So I need to select this, and I should be able to now do a test recover of the VM. Because just like similar to SRM, right, we run these DR tests to make sure that the failover is actually going to work as intended. And so we're going to keep everything as is, okay, and then we're going to test it, and then it's going to run it through, you know, its validation pieces here. And then let's look at this migration to see how it's going. All right, so it's starting to move back here. So as we're doing that test, we'll see if we'll see these numbers jump as it comes over. So there you go. You know, it went to 143, it moved, and now that it's all the way over, now we're up to 71 to 72 milliseconds, but we're still pinging. We know the network extension is there, right? But now we've got some latency involved with this application. And so this is where we need to understand what these latency requirements are, and where, you know, if it's a 3-tier app, where everything is sitting. Because if we know, you know, a database with this much latency, you got database on one end, and you're trying to match the database on the other side of the country. not a viable solution based on what we're seeing here.
Yes, from an integration standpoint, Site Recovery 8.3 now includes a checkbox that says Enable HCX. And if you check that, it will immediately disable vSphere replication within your environment.
There you go.
That's cool.
Yeah, so migration's done. It moved it back over. We're still pinging. The VM never went down, but now that we're going from, you know, Northern Virginia to Oregon, we've got some latency with this VM here. And so now that we tested it, it's validated. Now we just need to clean it up. Okay, once that's done, so we can test, recover, cleanup. And then I'll go through the motions again. So now as you get a reporting piece, you can see how many configured, how many active, how many not cleaned. And so this is a way for, you know, it's got some SRM feel to it, obviously, but then this is kind of the dashboard and you can see the progress of what's going on with the VMs here from an HCX standpoint. So that's how you would go about protecting your VMs. Then obviously here you can go through and see your snapshots, what the history is, what we've done on this VM from a protection standpoint. And then we can see where your source is right now, where we're going to land it. And so there's all this great information. Now that we've tested it and we've run it, now the test is success from an auditing standpoint, we could then go back, you know, to the application teams and operations and engineering and say, we've passed and validated this test, you know, on disaster recovery, and we've used HCX to do it here. So let me show you, I guess, one additional option that you have around, I guess, breaking and repairing things. Since, you know, are there any other, I guess, kind of use case questions that you've got? We've covered vMotion. Right, cloud to cloud, we set up the site pair, we set up the interconnects, we saw all the appliances deploy. We then set up a network extension in which we can show that you can actually move the VM from one part of the country to another across, you know, the same segment and not lose anything other than you introduce latency for obvious reasons, because no matter how good we are, we can't bend light, right? The next use case I was going to go into is what happens, you know, because these things are somewhat fluid, right? We can go into these actual interconnects and we can edit them if we need to for changes. You know, for example, if you want to see me, you might as well break stuff since I've been successful up to this point. If I want to change what is being done from I guess a management network, if I wanted to change the management and go from the external network to the management application network to try to set up my, change the profile here. Sorry, you got to do one at a time. I keep forgetting. Take that one off, take that one on, close it. All right, so now if we continue through, everything stays the same, but I want to build it out. We should see this break when we modify this mesh, because it's not going to like the fact that I'm going over the management network instead of through the uplink. And so it should get mad at me for trying to do something like that. And then we'll let that run through. But again, this is, if you want to see the differences of the dashboards, if you will, so we can see how many, you know, VMs we've migrated. We got one network extension, we got one VM protected. We can see the reporting of migrations that you've done and how many forward versus how many reverse. Here's where we can get an idea of how overloaded this SDDC is with the different appliances to see if we need to add more. You can see here that we're updating the service mesh and how far it is here. From a different standpoint, you know, you can see as you go into, now we're on the target SDDC, but you can see here that I've still got all this information coming across. And so, you know, if you didn't give people HCX access to the console, you know, via a login, their logins are still going to match up here to where you can do close to the same thing, not everything, right? Yeah, the administration is a little bit different, you know, as far as being able to do updates and troubleshooting and things of that nature. But you can still do some things, but not everything. But you would get your updates here. So what would happen is when 140 comes out, we'll get a banner across the top here that tells us that there's another version, and we can check for updates. Check for updates there. Let's go back and see if it, yeah, so you can see that it's mad at me because the deployment job of these workflows here, it's telling me that the scope is not defined for these VMC uplink networks. And so it's all kinds of mad. So if I need to fix that, rather than having to tear down the entire service mesh, I can go back in and edit the mesh just like I did last time. And then if I change it back to these uplinks, everything's going to go green again.
Hey, Sean, I think that's actually pretty cool that it shows the number of free IPs there. So
yes,
you get to kind of see what the ramifications are when you set up all your subnetting.
Exactly.
That's neat.
So as we deploy, we should see it go green again. If we want to dive into some of these from a log bundle standpoint, this is huge, right? Anytime we need to open up tickets with VMware, we know that the better you get the logs to support, or the faster you get the logs to support, the better off you will be. Another function we got built into HCX is just like we do with vCenter and vSphere, is that if we need to download logs, whether it be for all the appliances or for a Mongo dump or the core HCX, we can check as many boxes as we want, and then we can download those log bundles and get them up to support, you know, sooner than later. So that's a really nice thing that we've got here. And then obviously we can do all of our audit logs and things of that nature. And so again, we're really trying to have everything be similar as how we're helping to troubleshoot, right, with support, and that is getting the logs over as soon as we can, and then, you know, going through the motions there. You will see that, you know, this is going to go away over time, this interconnect configuration. It's deprecated, but, you know, we're hanging on to certain things until we know where to put them in other places. But, you know, the HCX port obviously is more powerful, but you can still do the day-to-day type activities through the plugin. Let's see where we're at here. Yeah, so it's validating these again, and once this is done, these should come back up as green.
Hey, Sean, can you go back to like VMs and templates or hosts and clusters and right click on a VM? What are your options as far as HCX from this perspective?
Yep, so the two HCX actions you have is you can migrate it or you can protect it to the target. And so it's migrate or protect depending on what you want to do with the VM. And then you'll get the same pop-up, you know, that you would get in the console, in which now you're selecting where you want to go, but you're doing it within vCenter instead of in the HCX console. So yeah, it's the similar thing. Good question. So what I'll do is, if you guys want to see what a teardown looks like, we can also tear this down from start to finish. If we want to see how that works, it makes it really simple to tear down. And if you have to start over, you can definitely do that. But you can see all the automation that's built in to HCX and how this works. It really is turnkey. You know, back in the day to set up a data center to data center connection to be able to move a VM, you know, in the old days, it used to take me between networking, storage, and security to get things set up would take, you know, several days to get everything done. And, you know, we set up a pair and moved a VM and pinged and did all this stuff across in less than an hour. So it's pretty cool. So you can see here, because it's spinning up a new one and it's testing it again, you see how this cross connect or this interconnect appliance is sitting here during redeploy. So you can see that we're taking one from another, redeploying it, deleting it, renaming it, and then adding it back, all in the background. And then this should come up green once it's validated again, and then off we go. And so there are things that we can do on the fly to adjust, you know, if something's broken or things of that nature. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. So one thing that's been really educational for me and hopefully for you, is that there's a lot that you can see inside of vCenter still to see it deploy, but it's really powerful to see the automation and all the work that we've done to get HCX where it is. It's a really cool technology. I think it's phenomenal, and it makes cloud to cloud migration. So, I know customers are using cloud to cloud migrations between SDDCs all day long. It's something that we asked for, and now that we have it with the 1.8 release that came out a couple months ago, it's here to stay, and we've really made the deployment of it super simple, in my opinion. So yeah, so now we're all up here, we're all green, everything's as it should be. And so that's what happens when you break stuff, is it allows you to redeploy your mesh and to test again. And then, like we were doing earlier, you can always do a resync on your service mesh, and you can do what you need to, right? And so if we refresh this, hopefully this is all still red here. So if I do a resync, because of the changes that I made, everything should come back green here. And then once this is done, we can go through a teardown to show you how we just get it all back to 0. Questions, comments?
It's quiet. Too quiet.
Everybody's watching Netflix.
That's why your latency is so bad.
Yeah, probably.
Very cool. Thanks for.
No, Sean, you just did that good a job.
Yeah, we just don't have questions.
Appreciate it.
Well, just so everyone knows, Sean called me about an hour before we started, and he was freaking out because things weren't working. Yep. And he's like, "We may need to cancel." I'm like, "It's all good."
No, we're not. No. He said, "No, we're not."
No can do. No can do.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So this is
great job, though, Sean. Really
appreciate it. So
I had a lot of questions that just watching you answer the questions.
So this is kind of the lesson that I learned. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but when you tear down a mesh, I don't personally know if it works, right? And it took me a long time. And to Steve's point, I was kind of nervous, but what I would recommend doing, that if you know you're going to tear this down, because you have network extensions that are built into the interconnect appliance itself, if you tear down the extension first and then delete your interconnect, you're probably going to be better off, because there is an additional discovery that has to be done. Because when you tear down the interconnect and you remove all of these appliances, it's looking at the dependencies to see what else is inside of those appliances that need to be removed first before they can tear it down. And you can't take down a site pair until you take down the interconnect. And I'm not saying that you can't take down an interconnect until you take down a network extension. They will go together. But what I believe I did prematurely before I set this up again is I didn't let this network extension fully tear down. And because I didn't do that, the interconnect took forever to remove. And that's the reason why panic was starting to set in a little bit.
So we have 2 questions.
Sure.
If both the source and destination HCX site hosts can see the same fiber channel storage, meaning they can both see the exact same storage, will the storage migrate or will it skip? Like, is it smart enough to know that both source and destination can see that storage? And that might be we'll have to look that one up.
Well, I kind of understand the question, but the storage in VMC is all on NVMe drives on the host. There's no fabric.
Yeah. So I guess it's more for, data center, your own data center.
Yeah. Because there's no fabric storage that this is connected to on the SDDC side. It's all NVMe that's sitting inside of an i3 instance in AWS. What's the other question? So the network extension's gone really quick, and so now we're going to tear down this interconnect as we're talking. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so the other question is, when you set up the original firewall rules, you set up any for inbound and outbound. Can you lock that down? Is there any documentation that covers the ports protocols for HCX, right? Just so we
Yes, there is actually. Let's see here. So as part of the blog series that we have here, as part of this cloud architecture toolkit, You can see the network extension ports here. What is required is 443, 4500, TCP 443, UDP 500, and UDP 4500 are required ports to have open. This architecture here is for a hybrid cloud, but if you were just to take the cloud provider data center and fold that over like a book, that's how it would look on both sides for an SDDC migration, but you can see the pathway on the source data center from a hybrid standpoint. You can lock it down further just for the sake we're doing any for the demo, but to your point, yes, absolutely lock it down. But you've got to have 443, 500, and 4500 open to be able to do traverses and that.
Cool. And then one more in the chat, and I think I know the answer, but it's more of an HCX in general question is, does HCX support a vSphere 6.0 environment with NSXV to a vSphere 6.7 environment with NSXV?
On the NSXV part, I want to say on both fronts, I want to say yes. I know with HCX we go all the way back to like 5.
Yeah.
On-prem. So my theory was correct because I removed the extension first. It didn't take a half an hour to tear it down. It took like 2 minutes. All the appliances were gone. But when I didn't remove the network extension first, the teardown took almost an hour. So there you go. And then if I wanted to go all the way out, I could come in here onto demo 2, and I could undeploy HCX. And at that point, it's going to take down the HCX manager. It's going to rip it out, and then we're back to just a one node SDDC with NSX, vSAN, and vSphere.
Pretty slick.
So I had a good time. No lie, I was nervous as could be at 11:30, but I feel better now. So
You
good.
killed it.
Hopefully everybody learned something.
Absolutely.
Included.
Yeah. No, that was great. Any other questions from anyone? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I know we're about 2 minutes over, but yeah, that was great, Sean.
All right,
So
well,
I think,
appreciate the opportunity. Thanks everybody for the help. Good questions.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah, thanks
Appreciate
everybody. All righty.
Thank you. See
Take
ya.
care.